How hard has the gas market and US LNG exports been hit by COVID-19? And to what extent has the market effects of the pandemic impacted companies' plans for investments in gas projects and LNG in specific? These were some of the questions Anne Ekern from ONS addressed when speaking with President and CEO of Tellurian, Meg Gentle, joining her from Houston.
So, Meg Gentle, President and CEO of Tellurian, it is a great pleasure to have you join us for the ONS 2020 Goes Digital.
Happy to be with you, Anne.
Thank you. So the topic for our conversation today is gas to market and US LNG exports, bull or bear. So how hard has the US gas market in US LNG exports been hit by the COVID-19 situation?
So interestingly, the US gas market itself has expanded demand during COVID, potentially because the residential and power gen have been sustained by people continuing to work from home. Luckily, global demand was down, so US exports were not as acutely needed. And we have only been running the facilities in the US at about 50% capacity for June, July, and August. And we've definitely seen the bottom of the LNG market with August growing versus the June bottom. And we should be back at 100% capacity utilization in the US by October. We can see this already because any cargoes that would stay in the US would be scheduled now for October. So US LNG exports will return to about 70 million tons being exported as of October, which is going to be so important as we go into the winter months, recovery from COVID, and into 2021, where there's very, very little additional LNG capacity coming to the market.
So to what extent have you seen this situation impact companies' plans, in terms of investments into gas projects and LNG projects? And will it impact, Tellurian's plans and projects to an extent?
So existing construction has sustained a little bit of slowing, and new construction definitely took about a 12-month delay to get started, which is going to mean that the market in 2025 and 2026, we from the supply side are going to struggle to meet demand growth. So it's going to be a really fascinating market over the next 5 years. We have sustained in LNG alone an almost 10% per year growth in the market for the last 5-year period. And we're expecting that to be constrained by supply growth for the next 5-year period to only about 5% or even less, depending on the pace of completion of the existing construction. So we're going to definitely have a market tightening for the next 5-year period, almost a supply starvation, if you would think of it that way. And then as we get to 2025, 26, 27, we have to have new construction starting. We would anticipate that those construction projects that were slated for 2020 start would actually have the opportunity to begin in 2021. And that's going to be true for Tellurian's project in Louisiana on the US Gulf Coast, Driftwood LNG.
So this explains why we see a lot of analysts say that although you see depressed prices for LNG now, as you do in most other energy markets, they're very optimistic, very bullish about the future, and they predict that LNG will be highly competitive. So you share their view on this?
I do, in fact, and it's been fascinating to watch the market balance, especially the interplay between the US and Europe, such liquid interconnected markets from multiple sources of pipeline gas. And then balanced by LNG. And as we responded to reduced demand from COVID quarantine, the first balancing factor was actually coming from Europe with a lot of LNG going into European storage, and pipeline gas actually reducing production to balance the market. As storage started to get saturated in Europe, the next balancing factor were cargo cancellations in the US, which really didn't start until June. So there was a very good symbiotic relationship between the European market and the US market, and that is going to continue to provide the strength for LNG and for natural gas to really be a commodity for the future, and such an important commodity as we try to move the world to a much more carbon neutral energy system that has to balance reduced carbon and reliability. And the supply that comes from our two markets is not only balancing each other, but also providing that reliability for the world.
Very interesting. So, you already alluded and said something about it, but in the big picture, and you're looking at LNG's possible role in the energy transition, could you comment a bit more on that? What kind of role can we see it play?
As we transition to carbon neutral, we have to employ natural gas, and I think that is echoed with your energy commissioner, and also by the practices that we see in the European market. Natural gas provides a reliability for the grid, and a storage solution where we can store energy for the times when the wind isn't blowing, the sun isn't shining, and there isn't enough rain, to have that reliability in the electricity grid, and even to move LNG into the transportation sector, so that we can be replacing coal-fired power on the power gen side and oil-fired transportation sources on the transport side, where, versus coal, we reduce carbon by 50%, versus transportation fuels by about 25 to 30%. And this is how, we're going to make very, very fast progress on the transition, and really provide the space for renewable technologies to become more and more competitive, more and more reliable, as we grow renewable from today only about 3% of our total energy supply to something that's much, much larger.
So it can help us be very flexible in terms of combining it with other energy sources. So, but still, given this, sitting in Europe and in the light of the European Green Deal, some reports say that this will severely impact the demand for European gas and global LNG in a material way, with actually some saying Europe's underlying need for LNG may totally disappear by 2030. Would you like to comment on that? What's your perspective?
Yeah, in fact, I really actually love that question and that debate in so many ways, because the importance of LNG for the European market is really a supply alternative, a security of energy supply, and the infrastructure that Europe has built. Definitely starting with Spain, France, and Italy, and then the UK, and then more recently Poland, a little bit in Germany, and even the potential to connect some of those LNG import terminals into Eastern Europe with a pipeline grid. It provides the European energy market, so not just the gas market, the European energy market with a supply alternative that keeps natural gas competitive, not just from LNG, but from all sources, as all sources have to compete in the market at whatever LNG can come. So the importance, frankly, of European policies is to provide for the investments for infrastructure that always allows LNG imports to be an option for the European market. And that is what gives Europe such a diverse supply base, and really allows it to trade on a daily, a weekly, and a monthly basis without having to commit to very, very long-term contracts it really leaves Europe as the most flexible market in the world.
So if I hear you correctly, from a renewable perspective, it actually can make it possible for us to have the courage and actually run a lower risk and relying more on renewable energy sources than we
You're
otherwise
exactly
would.
right. Yes, I always view natural gas as the true partner for renewables that gives the market the stability that allows renewables to really make increases in market share.
Great, very interesting. So from a global perspective, looking at the global energy markets, how do you see everything kind of, come out differently from this situation?
So a number of things that are going to be very important trends and actually very exciting to watch. First, I do think June was really the bottom for the LNG market, and we're going to have a consistently strengthening LNG trade as we go into the 2020-2021 winter. And then we'll have a tight market, a pretty tight market, as we watch LNG over the next 5 years. And in fact, I do anticipate that we have one result of COVID is an increased focus on respiratory health and the importance of clean air in so many very polluted cities in the world, especially some of the very large cities in Asia, where natural gas can really, cut particulate matter and all of the things that cause actual, pollution and bring clean air to those cities. And we all, I think, in the United States, in Europe, all around the world, we want to bring that clean air, and that is going to help us achieve our carbon objectives as well. So as we look to the long term, I think we actually do see an increased market share for natural gas as we're supporting renewables, an increase in market share for renewables, and a really strong partnership from a commodity that is finally trading as a real market.
Thank you. So looking at, trying to set like 3 challenges, whether it be for the LNG gas market or the industry, the energy industry, overall, where do you see the 3 biggest challenges lie that we are faced with and have to tackle?
I think our biggest challenge is definitely providing the supply that is going to keep pace with a growth in demand. And this is going to be critical over the next 10 years, especially as sources of capital are reallocating a little bit to actually, refund and rebalance some of the price shock that so widely impacted the energy business over the beginning of 2020. And so as we allocate capital to, efficient infrastructure resources, we have to do that in a way that really supports supply growth at an economic, and competitive price level that allows economies to grow and pollution to be reduced. So I would leave that with you, I guess, as the number one challenge. And frankly, as policymakers think about ways that policy can support, it's really to think through the balance between keeping all of us in the energy companies striving toward lower and lower carbon, and also balancing that with incentivizing and supporting infrastructure to be constructed.
Thank you. And kind of approaching the end of the interview and finishing maybe on a positive note, where do you see the greatest opportunities for this industry when you look into the future?
For the gas business, the biggest opportunity is really the coming of age of gas as a true commodity business, where we all trade natural gas from a day-to-day, a week-to-week, and a month-to-month basis. We no longer need long-term contracts. We are now so much more like the oil business than ever before in terms of trading liquidity, and that's what brings about, change in markets, flexibility, security, and allows us to support all of our environmental objectives. So the opportunity is there for flexibility and a competitive environment like we've actually never seen before in gas.
Thank you. Thank you so very much for joining us from Houston and for a very interesting conversation. Do you have any final thoughts or remarks you want to finish off with?
Only, Anne, that I definitely wish I was in Norway. Definitely the Houston, August reprieve and running off to Scandinavia is something that we missed out on this summer. So we look forward to recovery from COVID so we can be together again.
Same from us. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Anne. I'll see you soon.
See you soon.